Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Cass. I'm the executive producer of LOLA, Local Opera Local Artists, and I'm so excited to welcome two amazing people that I know very well, and we've all worked with each other together many, many times, and this is sort of the original LOLA team, to be quite honest. I'd like to welcome Rebecca Herman. She is the LOLA artistic producer, also a freelance opera director and producer, and Dr. Chuck Dillard, who is the assistant professor of collaborative piano at Portland State University School of Music and Theater, and also the founder and artistic director of Queer Opera, which is an initiative, nonprofit part of the Portland State University Foundation. Did I get all that correct?
That sounds great. Thanks, Liz.
Believe it. So the three of us actually launched the first project that Lola ever produced, which was La Femme Bohème, an all-female version of Puccini's opera La Bohème. And so much has happened since then. It's, I guess we're coming up on 8 years ago that we actually first started those conversations.
Wow.
And I really want to talk to you all today about the amazing queer opera. And I really want to start with the word queer, because I know, like myself and a lot of other people, we grew up being told not to use that word. It's not a nice word. And now it's a word that's really up front in our lives, something we're talking about quite a bit. So what does queer encompass? And how should we be using this word now and thinking about this word now in 2021?
That's a great question. Rebecca, should I start, or do you want to?
You can start and I'll jump in.
Great. So when speaking specifically about the word queer, let me first say that I know a lot of people have very specific definitions for themselves who identify as queer, and for queer as an identity generally. I personally and singularly view queer as an umbrella term that covers more. It's not gender-based, whereas lesbian and gay are gender-based. It's an umbrella term that covers people in the LGBTQIA community. Queer is, or has been, viewed as a derogatory term. There are lots of words in the lexicon that we are reclaiming and using as a sense of power to own and to apply to our own identities as a way of asserting our presence in the world in a really powerful way, doing away with the shame that's come with that word. Like you said, Liz, I grew up also with queer and other words being an insult rather than an empowering word. And it's just a way to empower ourselves in this community, and also to be as inclusive as we can be, again, without specifically having a label that's tied to gender.
Yeah, I think for me also, it is an umbrella term, and also for me personally, I identify as a queer woman, and that is able to encompass a lot of different parts of myself without getting super specific, like about whether I'm a lesbian or whether I'm bisexual or whether I'm monogamous or whether I'm polyamorous, or like all of these sort of different things that may or may not be a part of who I am. Like queer can kind of encompass any one aspect or like all of that for a lot of different people. And so, there are folks who consider themselves queer because they're kinky, and there are folks that consider themselves queer because they're trans, and there are folks that consider themselves queer because they're asexual, so it is both a sexual orientation identifier, and also just kind of something that says, I don't fit into the like the mainstream normative narrative, and you don't have to get more specific than that. And so it is I hope, or my way of thinking about it is that it's a all-inclusive way of saying, I'm a part of this other thing. I'm not part of this heterosexual, cisgendered, monogamous societal norm.
And I think pairing it with the word opera, which is very specific, having this very somewhat flexible term right next to this very specific term, I think oddly enough makes it very clear exactly what we are. We are an opera producing company that is going to be different than the norm in one way or another, either through casting choices or romantic choices on stage, or musical arrangements or something, that we are going to be different. The genre is opera, and we're going to approach it in a queer way. And that was my reasoning for putting those two words together.
Wow, that really helps and makes so much sense. And I think it's such a, obviously we have a lot of work to do in the world, but it's such a neat time that there's so much light being shown on these, on queer people and lesbian and gay, and that none of this is in the shadows anymore, right? So it's all up front in the sunlight. This is a world, this is who we are as human beings. And so maybe one day we'll get to the point where we're just looking at ourselves as human beings. But for now, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to talk to you about this and to shed even more light on queerness and queer opera itself. So now we know that you put those two words together, queer opera. What was the inspiration behind starting this organization?
Well, I do have to say that a significant portion of it is based on our work together for La Femme Bohème. I had never even remotely conceived of a project where you could do something different than what's on the page. And Liz, you and Rebecca showing me the possibility with La Femme Bohème of taking something so standard, so classic and beloved as Puccini's La Bohème, and really modernizing it in making it applicable and showcasing relationships that we were seeing all around us in Austin. That was just a very powerful thing. Also, so the idea for queer opera really began in 2017, and I came to Portland State from Austin in 2016, and one of the first things that I saw was the diversity of the student body. And by diversity, I mean sexual and gender identity, not necessarily racial identity here in Portland, Oregon. But seeing students that were gender fluid, that were non-binary, the prevalence of the they, them pronoun among students that I wasn't accustomed to in Texas really sparked my interest in thinking, who is telling their stories on stage? And, you know, straight theater, by straight theater, I mean theater, like plays and whatnot, have been doing this for a while, but opera has not. Opera's been lagging behind by, 50 to 100 years. And so I was seeing these students that were queer and playing these incredibly straight roles in opera, and queer girls kissing queer boys that that just didn't feel right to me, knowing them off stage and knowing how they identify. And I was just aching to give these students an opportunity to play someone in an opera that looked like them, related like them, dressed like them, loved like them, on the opera stage. And that doesn't mean that we have to look for brand new works of opera. The relationships are there in Verdi and Puccini and Mozart and whatnot. We just have to adapt them. And I've always felt like, music is plastic. You change it, it's not going to hurt anyone. So why not just make a few little changes and see what happens? And the audience here absolutely loves it.
That's fantastic. And it reminds me of something I heard somebody say about the inauguration this week, the power of representation. I mean, I just like, when you were talking about aching to see these kids have the opportunity to really do something that speaks to their real life. I mean, I can't even imagine the power of being able to put that on stage and them being seen, other folks being able to see themselves in those relationships. That's just amazing.
Yeah.
So you and Rebecca have worked really hand in hand on all of the queer opera projects so far, or most of the queer opera projects. And so how did this team come together for queer opera?
Well, I'll start this and then I'll hand it off to Rebecca. Yes, I mean, she has been my right-hand human in this project for the entirety of it. And it all, I mean, I knew of her skill and her value through Femme Bohème. And she said yes from the moment that I asked her. She said yes to every project. So Rebecca, I don't know if you want to talk any more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have always enjoyed working with Chuck. We've had a really, over a decade now, long working relationship in various forms. And I think that I also really enjoy kind of messing with the norm and kind of, everything that we do at LOLA, whether it's Femme Bohème or whether it's Clemenza or we might be struck by lightning. Like I always feel like, or even the Dido that we did, which in some ways, which is maybe our most traditional thing yet, we still are bringing in modern dancers, or like the music director, Brent Baldwin, is doing some really fun kind of choral spooky moments that are maybe alluded to in the music, but not really written out in any sort of way. And so I think this is just another way of tapping into my creativity and kind of telling stories that I'm interested in telling, which include a wider variety of representation than what traditionally has been written into operas, which is the medium that I love and the medium that professionally I work in all of the time. So it's been a great opportunity for me to showcase some of my own ideas on what romantic relationships can look like. But also I want to say that queer opera is about showing a more diverse representation, and we work with singers who are allies as well as queer people, and it's not about, it's a fine line what I am doing, because as actors we have to be able to play all sorts of things, and it's not just that you're playing yourself when you're on stage. And so I think that because we're working with students, I have a responsibility to be teaching them real tools that they can use as they go into life and are asked to play characters that don't look like they do or feel like they do, at the same time giving them opportunities to see themselves on the stage as well. So, you know, I think that's an important distinction. Certainly in professional companies, like we would never ask someone, oh, what is your what is your sexual orientation before casting someone? Like that's not really appropriate. But in our workshop, having the feedback, like I learn as much from our participants as I hope they are learning from me, just because they are telling me about how they walk through the world and what their experiences are. And it's really fun to kind of have my, even some of my ideas, which I really try to have a flexible mind. One example is when we did the final trio from Rosenkavalier a couple of years ago. In my mind, Octavian, always a pants role, always sung by a mezzo. You know, well, even if she was in modern clothes, she would be in pants. And our singer was like, I think I might have Octavian wear a skirt. And I was like, what? But it was great. It was a lot of fun. And so, you know, it definitely makes me confront some of these stereotypes in my head that I, even though in some ways I'm really breaking the mold, in other ways I'm still stuck in our conventional ways of doing things. So
that's a really, really cool observation. And there's always been queerness in opera, right? Like it's always been there, but not talked about in those terms. I love the idea of a pants roll wearing a skirt. It's,
yeah, and what was interesting about that scene, all three singers in that scene were straight, but it was not a straight scene. So they were really pushing themselves, and like Rebecca said, we welcome allies into the program just as much as queer folk, and it's so special to see the journey that our ally friends take as well during the week.
That leads me to my next question, and some of it I think you've already kind of answered, but between you both, what are some of the challenges and also some of the opportunities, both musically from your perspective, Chuck, and theatrically from your perspective, Rebecca, about this project? Or about this organization, I should say.
you start, Chuck.
Okay. Well, my easy answer will be, from the music standpoint, is that there are no challenges. The music is, it's not like putting together a table or something. It's not like, you know, part A fits into part B, and if that doesn't fit, then the table falls down. Like, that's not it. If, you know, having a tenor singing Pamina is fine, it's just down the octave. Now, what gets a little bit complicated is if, you know, Pamina is sung by a tenor and Tamino is sung by a baritone, and so we have like some registral things. That's a little bit complicated, but that's also why I use finale and transpose things. You know, we're going to talk about Old Maid and the Thief in a little bit, and Mr. Todd, who is normally sung by a dramatic mezzo in one of our casts, is sung by a baritone, and so I'm bringing it down a third for him after putting it into finale. There are no musical challenges. When we did Femme Bohème, and we had the end of Act 3, that quartet, which is normally 2 sopranos and a tenor and a baritone, I believe. with all kinds of spacing between the voices. And then we did it with 3 women or 4 women, and it's just all right on top of each other for about 10 seconds. When you listen to it, you're like, oh wow, that's top heavy and unusual. And then you get used to it. It's not, the Rosencavalier trio has 3 treble voices right on top of each other, and no one thinks that's unusual. It's just what the listeners are used to. And so we had one journalist who reviewed one of our performances saying that the sonic landscape, or whatever journalistic terminology he used, was unusual at first, and then you immediately settle into it and you accept it for what it is, and you enjoy the drama and you're along for the ride. And without question, the audience has felt like, from a musical standpoint, we have delivered. If you're an operatic elitist, then you're not going to come to a queer opera show, most likely, and that's fine. We're not looking to sell you a ticket. We want to sell tickets to people who want to see something new and exciting and fresh. And the music and the drama are both exciting and fresh.
Yeah, and I think like you are creating opportunities for, and I know we don't want to get bogged down in trying to change people's minds, right? We want to share our human experiences.
Right.
But you are creating opportunities to bring people together and to be transformed in so many ways. I mean, people who are already all in, ready to go along for that ride. But I think we all remember with La Femme Bohème, we had people sitting shoulder to shoulder, opera elitists and folks who'd never seen a show before, and both having powerful experiences because of that opportunity. So bravo to you.
Thank you. And I'll say just one other thing, because you mentioned opportunities, and I do want to say something. So many universities have a plethora of sopranos and mezzos, and 1 or 2 tenors and 3 or 4 baritones, and that's kind of it. And so, you have an undergrad show and you end up doing Suor Angelica, or God forbid, Dialogue of the Carmelites, if you don't have that many men. And I just don't see any reason for that. You can do whatever you want if you're willing to cross-gender some of the cast, and there's nothing that a man can do that a woman can't do. I mean, childbirth is the only thing, and as far as I know, there is no childbirth on stage in opera. Rebecca, there's one. Okay. So why not do it? Anyway, enough about that.
Oh, that's great.
I think some of the challenges, and I put that in quotation marks, are just getting out of our own kind of lanes, or like narrow-minded ways of thinking about things, and sometimes like the same that you would have when you're casting other productions, like the singers that show up are the singers that you need to cast, and you want to give them scenes that are right for them dramatically and also right for them vocally. And so like sometimes getting all of those pairings and having a cohesive program at the end of it, like that's a fun challenge for me. Like, it's not like, oh gosh, what are we going to do? It's like, oh great, how are we going to give all of these voices and all of these individuals the right opportunity? And that can be fun, and it can lead me and Chuck on some pretty crazy, like, throwing someone like a list of duets and trios at 3 a.m. some mornings and whatnot. But I think at the end of the day, we want to be respectful of these individuals' talents and give them moments to shine on stage, and also moments to grow on stage and just in life. So that's the challenge. And I will also say, we're not working with professionals, and we're not always, although we are working with some professionals. And there's a lot of responsibility that comes with asking anyone to be vulnerable and open. And that's both a challenge and also a real honor of doing this work, is getting to be a part of this process that is really affirming to a lot of these people that have maybe not had the sort of affirmation that our work does in the past. And like seeing a singer who came in having feeling like they didn't have a community, and feeling like they didn't have a voice, or like that their body mattered, and a week later seeing them stand on a box and like just be there and not apologize for the space that they take up and for the identity that they have, is really powerful.
I have to applaud you for taking that view and for the work that both of you are doing. You know, it sounds like a totally different kind of experience than, I had a great college experience, actually, a really good college experience. But I think what we were told mostly was, get a thick skin. And it helps in life in some regards, but as artists, we have to stay connected to that ultra vulnerable place. And I mean, queer artists having this opportunity, and their allies, to grow in an empathetic space like that, in a safe space that you all have created, is monumental.
And I just want to say, I have been hearing a lot of chatter, and I am challenging myself that we should not be cultivating safe spaces, but we need to be cultivating brave spaces, because safe spaces keep us padded and then don't allow us to talk about the uncomfortable things that sometimes we need to talk about in life. And brave spaces say, this is a space where you can go out on a limb. You can show your unrefined, unperfectly worded thing, and we're going to listen to you, and we're going to maybe challenge you, or you're going to challenge us, but it's a space where we can do that together. And so in my work, I'm hoping to be creating brave spaces, not only safe spaces.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
Super important. I love that point of view. Thank you for sharing. So, do you have something else to add?
No, just that I'm still learning, but I will continue to learn forever, and that's part of the journey.
I'll add one little thing to that, to speak to Rebecca's amazing ability, is that, so back when I was doing some queer opera conversation interviews with some professional singers, it was interesting, the singers in their late 30s and 40s, when I was talking about being authentic on stage and bringing your whole self and queer representation, many of those professional singers are like, well, as long as they pay me, I'll be whoever they want me to be on stage. It doesn't matter. But those singers also had a very strong sense of self off stage. And so they were able to live their own queer lives fully off stage. They didn't have to hide or anything like that. And so when they did perform an operatic role, if it was a straight role, if it was a heterosexual role, it didn't really make any difference to them. But what what Rebecca does so well, and Liz, I know that you know this, is that she makes sure that anybody that comes into the room with her is really heard and feels respected and seen. And that the week that we spend with the singers, I think that's the magic that she does, is allowing these singers to not leave themselves at the door and then walk into an opera space and be somebody else. Like, they bring them their whole self. She lets them bring their whole self to the production, and that is really amazing to see, because I mean, as a gay man, I've done this, my whole life, and I'm a pianist, and so it's different than playing a role. But you get up to a certain point in an encounter, in a professional relationship, and you realize, oh, I have to leave this part of myself behind because it's not going to be safe moving forward into a professional situation. And the singers in Portland are a little different. They have a stronger sense of self and safety already, but opera is just such a traditionally specific field, and it's still being trained that way. Singers are being trained that way for the most part. That's something that Rebecca really does a great job of, is making sure that anyone that comes into a room is fully respected, heard, seen, and welcomed. And that's why I will always want her as part of my queer opera team.
And I do want to say, for professionals, whether you're queer or straight, you walk into a rehearsal room and you play the part. Like, that's part of the job, and you shouldn't have to reveal any part of yourself that you don't want to in a rehearsal process. And I think one of the things that I've really been learning about this past year, when I haven't been working because of the pandemic, is I've been going to a lot of workshops on intimacy choreography. And in the past, we've often relied on performers to use their own personal experience to block or create intimate moments. And that is uncomfortable for a lot of people, and really not safe for a lot of people, because you don't know what they're you could have someone who is a virgin trying to do the Romeo and Juliet scenes, and the director says okay, you guys figure it out, you know what to do. Well, that person may be I don't know what to do, but not feel comfortable saying that. And so by having these intimacy choreographers, or anyone who is able to not have the onus be on the performer to bring their own sexual experience, sexual orientation, what it means to be attracted to someone, all of that, and really saying, what is the story? What is this moment in the story saying? Is this a first time, those are the butterflies, and that attraction is something that's awakening for the first time? Is this an encounter where we're almost bored and it's kind of a comedic, intimate scene? Just what is the story beat? And then how do we ask the performers to do it? And why we have had this one thing, where as directors and producers, every moment of a play, of a movie, of a whatever is so scripted. And then for this one really important moment to be left up to the performers is a real question mark. We've fallen down as an industry on that point. But all of that to say, I think it's really important for our colleagues that we work with in queer opera to feel seen and to feel heard. I also think it's important to acknowledge that in professional worlds, you don't have to out yourself if it's uncomfortable and if it's not safe, and you shouldn't feel like you have to have that calling card in any circumstance. And I think that's an important distinction to make.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, intimacy too, like it's got to be a challenge for stage directors. Like, it's amazing that you're doing these workshops, because you've got to be able to help others feel confident stepping into those moments. You have to also feel comfortable really talking about them and dissecting them. So I wonder if some of the, like, you guys figure it out has also been just like directors not being trained to really know what to say or how to coach these situations. It really puts you in a leadership position in that, overall it's a leadership position, but especially in that moment under the microscope. So speaking of projects, you're working on a big one right now, and we are in the middle of a global pandemic, no small thing. I love to remind myself of that every once in a while, especially if I'm like, oh, am I doing enough? And I say, just calm down, Liz. You're in the middle of a global pandemic. So you're doing a project in the middle of a pandemic. And so you've had to, of course, pivot like everybody else. So what are you working on? Chuck, do you want to start? What are you working on, and how are you accomplishing this project?
Sure. So it's hard to believe we're coming up on a year of this, but so last spring, I was a day away from doing the final music room run of Merry Wives of Windsor with the PSU Opera, and then we got shut down. That project got canceled, as did many projects around the country. We had a world premiere scheduled for the fall of 2020 that also got canceled. And at that time, we thought that maybe things would be clearing up by the spring of this year, and we were all pretty optimistic. But I had this bright idea when we realized that things were going to be locked down a little bit longer than normal, to do a virtual opera. So Queer Opera, the workshop that we do normally happens in September. That got canceled, so there was essentially going to be no queer opera offering. So I talked to my colleague at PSU, the opera director, Christine Meadows there, and asked her if she would be willing to team up and do a virtual production, if we could have a queer opera sort of element, if we could do some cross-gender casting. So my idea was to do Giancarlo Manotti's Old Maid and the Thief with two casts. One treble cast, I could say, and one bass cast. So what I mean by that is the four singers would be female singers, and the other four singers would be male singers. And it is normally three female singers and one male singer. And so we cast that production, and I created orchestral tracks on Finale on a MIDI program for the entire show with clicks so that the singers could sing along. I can let Rebecca speak more about the production, but starting in the early fall, I sent singers these files for them to practice with, to sing along with. And we held some in-person socially distant coachings, but very few. Most of it was self-motivated, self-directed in terms of musical production, musical preparation. And the cast has never really met as a whole. And we are going into Tech Week next week. And I'll let Rebecca talk about what she's been doing for the last month.
Oh my, I can't wait to hear about this and a Tech Week in this kind of, with this sort of dynamic.
So Chuck asked me about doing this project, and I said, well, I'm not doing anything else. What better thing to do? And I think there are a lot of challenges. I'm so used to working in space with people and being able to just see the whole room and have, you know, work with singers and their chemistry together. And like so much of being by yourself is that I had to create, you know, I had to keep, if I'm working with one singer, I have to keep the knowledge that I have in my head of what that partner is doing, so that I can tell that one singer, okay, well, on this word, they're actually going to be like smashing a newspaper on the table, and I need you to react to that. And they've never heard how their partner is delivering a line, so I have to do a lot of kind of, okay, well, actually, I think this line is where we start to turn from kind of the social pleasantries to like something more real. And I need to see that transition in your eyes, and all of that sort of stuff. So it's been very, I know nothing about how film directors do things, but I feel like I have a new appreciation for them, because I can always see when I'm normally directing, everything that I'm directing, I can see. And I think for film directors, so much of what they're directing, they can't see. They have to imagine, oh, the special effects are going to do that. Oh, you know, that's going to be created in post or whatever. This is just a whole new world to me. But the singers have been really eager and creative and willing to try things, and it's exciting to be working with singers again. And it's not the ideal situation, but where I do think that the students are learning things, and also what a great exercise for them to really realize how important it is that you not only know your own music and your own text, but also your partners, because they can't rely on just hearing their partner say the line. They have to know what that line is so that they can react at the right time and in the right moment. So it's been a real challenge and a real joy at the same time. So we'll go into tech, and then in a couple of weeks, we'll go into recording sessions, and each one will be individually recorded. They'll be the only one in the room. They'll have all of their own costumes and props with them. I think Chuck and I will be with them virtually. And between takes, we'll kind of talk, and I might give them a couple of notes. Chuck might give them a couple of notes, and then we'll do that scene or that take again. And then I will be working with a film editor to put it all together. We're not doing green screen. I would call it a little bit of a hybrid of the, you know, Zoom, you see the 4 boxes or the 3 boxes, but I also think we'll be a little more artistic in, you know, crossfading, and some people taking the forefront, and maybe some in conversation, seeing one person and then the response and back and forth a little bit. But I don't know, that's all to be discovered.
And when will this project, when is it set to be completed and available for public consumption?
That's a great question. We know we are shooting for April, and we will be sure to let you know and be advertising on many different platforms. But it's, as with many things in life, we are holding it loosely. We will have all our recordings in the can at the end of the first week of February. And then from that point, we hand it off to the audio engineer, who will who will take the vocals that will be recorded essentially a cappella, because the orchestra will be fed to them through the earbud with a clip, with a click. And they'll take those a cappella vocals and layer them on top of an orchestra vocal without a click, and then sync that with the video that will not have audio. And then that will be handed off to the video editor, who will work with Rebecca to do all of this fun entering and exiting and fading and stuff that she was talking about. So we don't necessarily have a timeline on that, but we are calling this our spring offering. So look for it somewhere around in April to be presented, probably on Vimeo.
Great. I know there are a lot of folks out there who will want to see this, so we'll be sure to share the information. Gosh, everybody's had to pick up so many new skill sets. And I just really applaud y'all too for jumping in and making it happen. You know, something that comes to my mind a lot during this time is like, well, it's not necessarily why I got into this art form, but you know, it continues to challenge us in new ways, and it really feels like it's worth it to do it. And I know that the students you're working with are just gaining so much valuable skill and perspective. So I can't wait to see them and hear them and see your amazing work as always. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to add before we say goodbye?
Well, I want to give just a shout out to the cast members of this opera, who I do hope are able to see this interview, because yes, they are gaining a lot, but this is hard work for them, as is the case with many people around the country, especially with students. You know, a lot of them have moved back home to their parents or with their parents, and with 3 or 4 people in a household, trying to find a place where they can sing, where they can share, you know, internet bandwidth, where they can store all of their costumes and work around. Many of them have a work schedule that they have to deal with. They have really gone above and beyond to do what they need to do to get this done. And so in 2 weeks, it'll be, like I said, in the can, but until then, they still have some hard work to do, and I'm very proud of what they've accomplished.
Thank you both so much. Oh, did you want to add something?
No, I couldn't say it better.
Thank you both so much for your time and your skill, energy, perspective. And I think that we have a really nice interview here, and some of this will probably be edited out at the end, but thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Rebecca, Herman, and Dr. Chuck Dillard. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Great talking with you.
Bye.
I'm going to stop the recording.